He offered $50,000 for one night. No names, no rules, no second chances. Just a hotel key delivered in an unmarked envelope, crisp cash wired to a burner account, and a single line scrawled in ink that looked more like a threat than a proposal. Wear black. Say nothing. Obey. She said yes, with fingers that didn't tremble, but only because she'd trained herself not to show what broke beneath the surface. Hunger had taught her that pride was expensive, and survival had no use for softness. So she packed nothing but a black slip dress and silence, stepped into heels that hurt before she even walked out the door, and kissed her reflection goodbye like it might not return. The elevator ride up to the penthouse was slow, luxurious, cold. Her heart didn't race. It throbbed, slow, deliberate, like it knew it was walking into a trap, and still craved the teeth. She had been with powerful men before, men who paid to feel strong in the dark. But this felt different. This felt like gravity had chosen sides. The door opened before she knocked. A man in a tailored suit, sleeves rolled, stood in the center of the room as if he'd been waiting hours or years. He didn't smile. His eyes didn't scan. They pinned, dark, unreadable. The kind of gaze that didn't ask questions because it already knew the answers. She didn't speak. Neither did he. She crossed the threshold. He didn't offer a drink, didn't say welcome, just pointed to the low table where a single black box waited. Inside it, a choker, thin leather, minimal gold, ownership wrapped in elegance. "Put it on," his eyes said. She did. He didn't touch her. Not yet. He circled, slowly, like she was art or prey or maybe both. He didn't look at her like a man looks at a woman. He looked like he was imagining her undone, torn open, studied, owned. "You're not what I expected," he murmured, his voice rough velvet, made for lies whispered against a bare neck. "They said you were beautiful. They didn't say you'd look like you wanted to be ruined." Her breath caught, just slightly, enough for him to hear. Still, he didn't touch her. Hours passed in minutes. He sat in silence while she stood, posed, obedient. She expected demand, control, sex, but he gave her suspense. He gave her nothing. "You don't speak?" he asked eventually, fingers clasped before his lips, elbows resting on the leather armrest like a king deciding whether to claim or discard. "No," she said softly. Good and still. No touch, no heat, just silence that coiled and pulsed. When he finally rose, she held her breath. He approached, slow as sin. He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, then he leaned close enough for his breath to kiss her skin, and whispered, "You think you're here to fuck me. But you're here to be seen." She didn't understand, not then. He walked away, left her standing, the air between them thick with everything unsaid. Her body ached with anticipation. No, with confusion. He hadn't paid for sex. He'd paid to haunt her. "Take off the dress." She obeyed. He didn't touch, just looked, until she wanted to scream or cry or drop to her knees just to feel something. Instead, she stood, naked, cold, not from temperature, but from absence. He had hollowed her without laying a finger. He walked to her then, touched her chin, tilted it. His thumb brushed her lower lip, and then he said, without warmth, without mercy, "You can go." Her heart didn't break. It snapped. She dressed slowly. He watched. She wanted to ask why. Wanted to beg, if only to stop feeling invisible. But she didn't. She left with her dignity shattered in pieces too sharp to gather. In the hallway, she realized her hands were shaking. He hadn't touched her. And still, she'd never felt so owned. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It's because of you that these stories keep traveling. Truly. And if you feel like it, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. I love knowing how far these words can reach. You're a part of this now. Thank you, deeply. She tried to forget him. Poured wine she didn't want, stared at walls that no longer held her reflection, took long baths where the water turned cold and her skin stayed warm from memory. But it wasn't memory. It was something deeper, something carved. He hadn't touched her, and still she felt branded by a gaze, by silence, by a man who knew how to break without raising a hand. The money came, as promised. $50,000 transferred without delay, without contact, no message, no trace. Just proof that the night had happened, and a silence that throbbed louder than any scream. She told herself it was over. One night, one man, one mistake in a long list of well-dressed errors. But when she opened her closet, the black dress still smelled like his penthouse. When she touched her throat, she felt the echo of the leather choker, and when she closed her eyes, she saw his mouth, still, silent, cruel. The days passed slow. Her phone didn't ring. No number appeared. And yet she checked, compulsively, like a woman waiting for a ghost to call. She tried to take a client, a safe one, a man who smiled too much and paid too little, who touched her arm and called her darling with hands that trembled from guilt. She smiled softly, undressed, waited for her body to respond. It didn't. Instead, it recoiled, not from him, but from the absence of danger. She ended it. Midway, told him she was sick, apologized for something she couldn't name. Walked out with her heels in hand and shame sticking to her ribs. That night she couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, breath shallow, body aching, not from need but from restraint. Her skin missed the eyes that burned. Her mind missed the silence that spoke louder than any moan. She missed not being touched. She missed being unmade. And then, at 2:14 a.m., her phone lit up. No name, just a number. The message said simply, "Tomorrow, same time." Her breath hitched. She didn't reply. Didn't need to. The next evening she dressed without thought. Same dress, same heels, no makeup this time, just bare skin and nerves wrapped tight around her spine. The penthouse door opened again without a knock. He stood in the same place, same suit, same silence. But something in his eyes had shifted. They were darker, sharper, as if he'd spent the week remembering her the way she had remembered him, with hunger and precision. She stepped inside. He didn't speak. This time, he didn't wait. He reached for her throat. Not with violence, with claim, his fingers wrapped around the place where the choker had been. And this time, he didn't ask her to undress. He did it, slowly, carefully, one strap, then the next, until the dress slid down her body like a sigh. "You came back," he murmured against her ear, "even after I sent you away." "I didn't have a choice," she whispered. "No," he said, voice low, dangerous. "You didn't." And then he kissed her, not like a man, but like a storm. A violent, punishing kiss, one hand tangled in her hair, the other at her jaw, forcing her to feel every inch of what he'd withheld. He devoured her like a punishment, and she took it like a prayer. This wasn't pleasure, this was surrender. He didn't let her speak, not with words, only with breath, with tremors, with the soft arch of her spine, when his hands moved over her skin like they had every right to. She didn't resist, not because she was weak, but because something stronger than fear had already claimed her. He kissed her throat, slowly, as if memorizing the pulse that raced for him. His grip was firm, never cruel, yet she knew he could be. She could feel it in the way he paused, watching her from beneath his lashes, waiting for the smallest flinch or hesitation, but she gave him none. She gave him everything. He didn't undress, only loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves again like before. It made her feel naked in a different way, like he was still in control, still untouched, while she stood bare before him, stripped of dignity and doubt. But she didn't hate it. She hated how much she needed it, how much her body had already chosen him long before her mind dared to catch up. He led her to the bed, without a word, not pushing, just walking behind her, a silent current of heat. She laid down without instruction. He hovered above her, one hand resting on her thigh, the other tracing the line of her collarbone. The weight of his gaze pinned her more than his body ever could. "You're quiet," he said, voice low and even, as if they were in a cathedral instead of a penthouse. "You like it that way," he smirked, just slightly, then leaned down, lips barely grazing hers. "I like when you obey, but I'll like it more when you stop pretending this doesn't matter. She wanted to deny it, to laugh, to disappear beneath him and become nothing but skin and heat. But he didn't let her. His hands were too careful, his eyes too precise. He wasn't there to use her. He was there to expose her, slowly, completely. When he finally entered her, it wasn't rough, it wasn't soft, it was inevitable, a claiming. Her body took him like it had been waiting for years, and he moved like he already lived inside her. No rhythm, no pattern. Just a slow, devastating collision of breath and heat and something far more dangerous than lust. He kissed her then, deeply, hungrily, and when she moaned, he didn't smile. He growled, low in his throat, primal and territorial, as if her voice belonged to him now. "You think you can leave after this?" he whispered against her mouth. "You think I'll let you disappear again?" She didn't answer. He thrust deeper. She cried out. His hand slid behind her neck, holding her steady as his mouth pressed to her ear. "You're mine. No one else touches you. No one even looks at you." Her body trembled. Her heart shattered and reformed in the space of a breath. He wasn't asking. He was declaring. And somewhere inside that darkness, she whispered the one truth she didn't want to believe. "I know." She woke in silk sheets that didn't belong to her, in a bed that felt like a cage disguised as heaven. The scent of him clung to everything, her skin, her hair, her breath. It wasn't just perfume or cologne. It was presence, possession. She could still feel the echo of his hands on her body, even though he was gone. And that absence, calculated, deliberate, made her ache more than his touch ever had. The room was dim, curtains drawn, a tray of breakfast untouched on a table near the window. Her dress folded neatly on the chair beside it, heels perfectly aligned beneath. Not one wrinkle, not one detail out of place. Roman's world didn't tolerate disorder, but she was starting to suspect that inside him, everything burned. She didn't remember falling asleep, only the way he held her after, not tender but firm, like he was afraid she'd vanish before morning, like he wasn't done with her yet. She showered in silence, let the water scald her skin, but it couldn't wash him off. The bruises weren't visible, but she felt them. Deep, psychological, erotic. When she stepped out, there was a dress waiting for her, not hers. New, dark green, soft, expensive fabric, a note pinned to it. No words, just an address, a time. Midnight. She wanted to ignore it, to walk out in her own clothes, reclaim some version of herself, but instead she dressed, slowly, deliberately, like slipping into someone else's identity and finding it frighteningly comfortable. The address was unfamiliar, a private club, discreet, luxurious, dangerous. The car was waiting downstairs, black, silent. Driver didn't speak, just opened the door and closed it once she was inside. She felt the city pass by outside the tinted glass, but it might as well have been another world. When she arrived, a man in a suit, different from the driver but cut from the same cloth, led her through velvet corridors and candle-lit staircases. No questions, no names, just doors that opened like secrets and silence that echoed with consequence. He was waiting for her inside, Roman, leaning against the bar, glass in hand, dressed in black like the shadows belonged to him. His eyes met hers before she even fully entered. He didn't smile. He never did. But his mouth curved in something darker, recognition, approval, hunger. He didn't speak, just held out his hand. She crossed the room. He pulled her close, not in a lover's embrace, but in a claim, one arm around her waist, the other sliding to the back of her neck. He stared into her eyes like he was looking for something buried deep, and when he found it, he didn't look away. "You came. I didn't have a choice." "You did," he said softly, lips brushing her ear. "But you chose right." She should have felt resentment, resistance, anything that reminded her she was still her own. But all she felt was the way his body pressed into hers, the way her pulse surrendered the second he touched her. He took her hand, led her through a hidden door behind the bar. A staircase descended into something older, colder, stone walls and flickering lights, the air thick with secrets and scent. A room waited below. Not a bedroom, not a dungeon, something in between. A space meant for rituals, for acts that blurred the line between sin and worship. He closed the door, locked it. She didn't ask why. He stepped behind her, brushing the zipper of her dress, slow, deliberate. He spoke in a whisper that crawled down her spine. "You belong to me now." She didn't nod, didn't speak. She just exhaled and let him take everything. The room was quiet but not still. The air moved differently down there, thick with velvet shadows and the hum of restrained violence. Roman didn't speak after he undressed her. He didn't need to. Every movement, every pause between touch and breath carried a language sharper than words. She stood before him, bare, the green dress pooled at her feet like melted desire. He circled her again, slower this time, like he wasn't just watching but deciding. Her skin prickled under his gaze. It wasn't shame, it was exposure. It was the kind of naked that came from being seen too deeply. When he finally stopped behind her, his fingers brushed the curve of her spine. A single line traced from the base of her neck down to her tailbone, and her body reacted like it had been waiting for just that touch. He leaned in, lips grazing her shoulder. "Do you know why I didn't fuck you the first night?" he murmured. She didn't answer. She wasn't sure she could. "Because you were still pretending you had a choice." He turned her around, slow and firm, and she met his eyes. They weren't cruel tonight. They were darker, possessive in a way that felt dangerous, obsessive in a way that felt holy. He tilted her chin, made her look up at him. "You walked out of that room like I hadn't touched you, but you left with me under your skin." Her throat tightened. He was right, and he knew it. "I watched you," he said, voice soft and savage, "when you tried to forget, when you let another man book you. Did you think I wouldn't know?" Her breath stopped. "You smiled at him," he said. "He reached for your hand, and I nearly broke his fingers." She felt it then, the possessiveness blooming between them, black and alive. He hadn't come for her just to fuck her. He'd come to claim her soul, to carve his name in places no one could reach. He kissed her, not gently, not violently, just completely, and then he whispered, "If another man touches you again, he won't walk away, not with his hands, not with his life." There was no drama in his tone, just truth, cold and final. Something inside her shuddered and surrendered, because she should have run, should have fought, but instead she leaned into his mouth, let him taste the fear, the longing, the truth, because he was already in her, and she didn't want him to leave. She stayed the night, not because he asked, not because she wanted to, but because leaving him felt impossible. He didn't say much after, just held her against his chest like she was something he'd already killed for, and maybe he had. His body was warm, but his silence was colder than anything she'd ever known. Yet in that quiet, wrapped in sheets that smelled like leather and danger, she found something she hadn't felt in years. Belonging, not safety, never that, but a strange kind of peace, born from surrender. Morning came slowly. The light that filtered through the heavy curtains was gold and thick, like the world outside had been reduced to a whisper. She opened her eyes to find him already watching her. He sat in the chair across the room, shirtless, barefoot, a glass of something dark in his hand, even at this hour. He didn't speak, just stared, as if memorizing the shape of her vulnerability. It should have made her flinch, but she held his gaze, letting him see what no one else ever had, not because she trusted him, but because somehow she no longer knew how to hide. He stood, came to her slowly. The mattress dipped beneath his weight, and when he reached out to touch her face, it wasn't rough. It was reverent, a kind of quiet awe, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "You don't belong anywhere else," he said, voice low, the edge of sleep still in it. "You know that, don't you?" She didn't answer. "I see the way people look at you," he continued, "like they want to taste you, touch you, own you, but they don't see you." "And you do?" "I see everything," he said, brushing his thumb over her bottom lip. "Every crack, every scar you don't show. And I don't want to fix you. I want to keep you broken, just like this." She should have felt offended, but instead, Her eyes burned, because it was true. He wasn't offering salvation. He was offering devotion, twisted, possessive, consuming, and somehow that felt more honest than any promise of love she'd ever heard. Later, he dressed her. Not like a man dressing a woman, but like a king preparing his most precious thing for display. The black dress he chose was tighter than the last, thinner straps, no zipper, just his hands pulling the fabric into place like he was sealing her fate. When he clipped the choker back around her throat, he didn't say a word, but the pressure of the leather spoke for him. Mine. He led her downstairs, through a different exit this time, less obvious, more discreet, as if he wanted to hide her, not from the world, but from the parts of it he couldn't control. In the car, his hand rested on her thigh, light, lazy, but the weight of it said everything. She didn't know where they were going. He didn't offer an explanation, and she didn't ask. They arrived at a private restaurant, empty, reserved. Candles flickered on every table, though the sun hadn't fully set. He ordered for both of them, wine and food she didn't recognize, and for the first few minutes they sat in silence. And then he spoke. "I saw you in the lobby 3 months ago. You were with that man in the grey coat, the one who smiled too much. I remember thinking, he didn't deserve to look at you." Her stomach tightened. "He touched your lower back. You flinched. He didn't notice. I did. Were you following me?" "I wasn't," he said, sipping slowly. "But after that day, I started." The wine tasted like fire. She didn't speak. "You don't belong to them," he said. "You never did. They see you as a fantasy. I see you as a war. And what are you? I'm the man who wins it." His words weren't soft. They were carved from stone and heat. But she didn't argue, because deep down, she'd always known she wasn't built for gentleness. She was made for someone like him, and now he had her. The walls were closing in, and she wasn't sure if it was the room or herself. Days blurred, nights stretched. Roman's presence wrapped around her like silk, soaked in poison, beautiful and consuming. He hadn't asked her to stay. He hadn't needed to. He simply made it so that leaving no longer felt possible. Every time she tried to reclaim something of her old life, an errand, a phone call, a breath, he was there, watching, redirecting, not with chains but with something more permanent, devotion. He moved through his world like a shadow, silent, lethal, worshipped by men who bowed their heads and women who looked away. She'd seen power before, had tasted it in the mouths of billionaires and politicians, but with Roman, it wasn't power. It was ownership, the kind that didn't ask for permission, the kind that didn't need to speak to be felt. She didn't have friends anymore, not real ones. They had faded the moment Roman entered her orbit, calls unanswered, messages deleted, some by her, some, she suspected, by him. The world beyond his walls became quieter, smaller, safer, and yet more dangerous than ever. He brought her to meetings now, sat her beside him like a sculpture no one was allowed to touch. Men glanced, but never twice. Women stared with thinly veiled contempt, but no one dared speak. She never spoke either, not in public. Roman liked her silent, still, immaculate, but he always watched her. Every breath, every twitch, every thought she didn't say. It both terrified her and made her feel like the most precious thing alive. At night, he was different, not softer, never that, but slower, focused. He undressed her like he was unraveling a puzzle, not for the body beneath, but for what it was hiding. And when he took her, it wasn't about pleasure, it was about claiming every piece she still tried to protect. She tried to fight it, once. Tried to say no, not to him, but to what he made her feel. To the way her heart cracked open every time he held her after. Breath warm against her back, fingers brushing her ribs like he could feel the tremor inside her. He didn't punish her. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "You can try to run, but nothing out there will ever touch you like I do." And he was right, because even when she closed her eyes, he was already there, etched into every nerve, every breath, every dream that used to belong to someone else. One evening she asked him why he kept her. It was the only question she ever dared. He didn't answer right away, just looked at her, eyes unreadable, jaw tight, and then finally he said, "Because the world chewed you up and spit you out, and you still had enough fire to look me in the eyes." She didn't cry, not then, but when he walked away, she stayed in the chair for hours, not moving, barely breathing, haunted by the truth in his voice. Because he didn't love her, he needed her. And needing someone like Roman Valenti was a kind of love that didn't leave room for anything else. She should have left that night. There was a moment, brief, fragile, honest, when the air between them shifted, and she could feel the door inside her open just wide enough to escape. But she didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't ask for more than what he gave, and maybe that was the beginning of the end, not of them, but of who she used to be. He came to her slowly, the way he always did when he was about to break something gently, not with rage, with precision. His fingertips skimmed her collarbone, tracing the place where her skin always warmed beneath his touch. She was standing, wearing nothing but silence, the kind that hung heavy in rooms filled with secrets. "You're too quiet tonight," he murmured. "I'm always quiet." "Not like this." She didn't respond. He walked behind her, pulling her hair back with one hand, exposing her neck to the room like it belonged to him. He didn't kiss her. He breathed her in, deeply, slowly, like the scent of her was something he'd earned the right to own. "Tell me what you're thinking." She wanted to lie, but the truth had weight now, and she was tired of carrying it alone. "I'm losing myself," she whispered. His grip tightened slightly. "Good." Her breath caught. He turned her around, and this time his face was bare. No mask, no cold detachment, just hunger, raw and quiet and terrifying in its honesty. "You were never meant to be whole," he said. "You were meant to be undone." He kissed her, and it wasn't gentle. It was the kind of kiss that said he'd destroy anyone who tried to replace him in her mouth. His hands gripped her hips, pulling her against him like distance was a threat. She melted, but not because he wanted her to, because she no longer knew how not to. He carried her to the bed, not with tenderness, but with purpose, laid her down like she was his altar, and when he moved over her, it wasn't sex. It wasn't even power. It was ritual, a silent declaration of possession. His name slipped from her lips once, soft, involuntary. He stopped, just for a moment, stared at her. "Say it again." She did. He closed his eyes, as if her voice had become the only truth he believed in. After, he didn't speak, just laid beside her, one arm over her stomach like a chain disguised as comfort. She stared at the ceiling, the echo of her own voice still vibrating inside her. She hadn't meant to give him that, but now he had it, and she knew, whatever this was, whatever they had, it was no longer something she could walk away from, because love wasn't what he offered. What he gave her was deeper, darker, forever. She stopped recognizing herself, in mirrors, in silence, in the way she moved when he entered a room. There was a time when her steps were sharp, deliberate, shaped by defiance. Now they softened before he even looked at her, not because she feared him, but because she craved the weight of his attention, craved it like breath, like blood, like something deeper than need. And that terrified her more than anything he could ever do. She had been alone for so long that independence had become her armor, but Roman didn't ask her to take it off. He peeled it back layer by layer, with every glance, every word, every moment of deliberate silence that made her question who she'd been before he touched her. And that's what killed her. He hadn't needed force, just time, just presence, just a mouth that never begged and hands that didn't hesitate. He didn't take her out anymore, not to the club, not to dinners, not even for air. She didn't know if it was for her safety or his control. But the walls of the penthouse had begun to feel like both prison and sanctuary. She stopped missing the city, stopped checking her phone, stopped remembering what her name used to sound like in anyone else's voice. Roman called her nothing. He never used a name, never gave her one. But the way he said "you" made her feel like the only person that ever existed. His voice carved her into being. And still, There were moments she wanted to scream, to rip the sheets, to slam doors just to hear her own pulse outside of his. But every time the fire rose in her chest, he would look at her, just look, and she'd forget what fury even tasted like. One night, she tried to leave. No bags, no warning. Just keys in hand and shoes she didn't wear anymore. She made it as far as the hallway, the elevator blinking in silence, when his voice slid across the air like a blade. "Where are you going?" She didn't turn. "I didn't say you could leave." Her body betrayed her first. The stillness, the ache, the way her hands lowered slowly, as if giving up wasn't weakness but instinct. He came up behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, but he didn't touch her. Not yet. "You think you can walk away from this?" he asked, not angry, not loud, just dangerously calm. "After what I've put in you?" She closed her eyes, not from fear, but because he was right. He turned her around, pressed her back against the cold elevator wall. His hand gripped her chin, tilting it just enough for her to meet his eyes. "Do you think they'll touch you the way I do? That they'll see you? That they'll make you forget me?" She didn't answer. He smiled, but it wasn't kindness. It was certainty. "They won't," he whispered, "because I marked you, in places no one else will ever reach." And then he kissed her, hard, deep, like punishment and forgiveness wrapped in heat. She didn't leave. She never would, because he was right. She wasn't hers anymore. She was his. She didn't remember when her pulse stopped belonging to her. It must have happened slowly, one heartbeat at a time, until the rhythm that once guided her turned into something else, something syncopated, something jagged, something that only responded to him. He no longer needed to touch her to make her shiver. All it took was a glance, a shadow at the edge of the doorway, the sound of his footsteps in the hall. Her body responded before her mind could catch up, and her mind had stopped protesting long ago. She had lost the will to fight it, and maybe that was the most terrifying part, how much it didn't feel like a loss anymore. Roman moved through their space like a storm, held just barely in check. He was never rushed, never uncertain, never loud, but everything about him whispered of violence coiled beneath silence. When he touched her, it wasn't possession. It was worship, twisted into something holy by the way his breath caught when she trembled. He didn't ask for devotion. He expected it, and she gave it freely, even when her chest ached with the weight of it, especially then. She woke one morning with his hand curled over her hip, not in affection, but in claim. His breath was warm against her spine, his body heavy and still. She didn't move, couldn't. There was something about his sleep that felt sacred, rare, fleeting. She learned to treasure those moments, the ones when his grip softened, when his jaw unclenched, when the monster in him slipped into something almost human, almost. But even in sleep, he never let go. Later that day, he took her to the rooftop, a quiet escape above the noise of the city he owned, but rarely touched. The wind was sharp, the sky pale, the kind of cold that kissed skin with teeth. She stood near the edge, the glass barrier thin enough to disappear when she looked past it. Roman stood behind her, close, but not touching. She could feel him anyway. He was always in her periphery, even when he wasn't near. She turned to him slowly, needing something she didn't know how to ask for. "Do you ever think about who you were before all this?" she asked. His eyes stayed on the horizon, but she saw the tension in his jaw, the pause in his breath. "No." "Why not?" "Because he's dead," he said, "and I buried him for a reason." She wanted to know more, but he didn't offer it, and she didn't push. He rarely spoke about himself. When he did, it came like this, short, sharp, final. And yet when he looked at her, it felt like he was begging to be understood in ways he'd never admit. That night, he undressed her slowly, methodically, like he was peeling away not just fabric, but memory. Every touch was a question. Every breath against her skin asked, "Do you still want this?" And every moan she gave in return said yes, not because she should, because she couldn't say no. Not to him, not to the way he made her feel like the only thing that had ever been real in his world of illusion and control. He pressed her wrists above her head, Not with force, but with certainty. His mouth moved over her collarbone, her chest, her stomach, tracing paths he'd already memorized, but never tired of walking. She writhed beneath him, not in pain, not in pleasure, but in that perfect space in between, where surrender and desire blurred into something beyond language. When he entered her, it was slow, devastating. His eyes stayed on hers, and she couldn't look away, couldn't hide. He moved like he was carving himself into her soul, one breath, one thrust, one whispered threat at a time. "You think you belong to yourself?" he asked, voice hoarse against her throat. "You don't." She shook her head, eyes glassy, lips parted with unspoken need. "Say it." "I don't," she whispered, the truth breaking over her tongue like heat. "Say who you belong to." "You," she breathed. He stilled inside her, exhaled like the words healed something in him he hadn't realized was bleeding. And then he moved again, deeper, harder, until she couldn't think, couldn't breathe, could only feel the truth of him inside every inch of her. After she lay in the aftermath of him, body aching, soul stretched, he didn't let her go. He never did. His hand stayed on her chest, over her heart, like he needed to feel its beat to believe she was still there. "You don't get to leave," he said quietly. "Not ever." She didn't reply, because he wasn't threatening her. He was promising her, and she believed him. She found him in the dark, sitting alone in the corner of the bedroom, shirtless, elbows on his knees, head bowed like something inside him had finally cracked. No light touched his face. Only the soft halo of city glow bleeding in through the windows, enough to catch the tremor in his fingers as he pressed them to his mouth. She had never seen him like that, unmoving, unguarded, undone. Roman was always composed, dangerous in his stillness, sharp in every breath. But this wasn't control. This was collapse held together by silence. She stepped closer without speaking. Her bare feet made no sound against the wood, but he heard her. She knew it by the way his shoulders tensed, the subtle shift in his breath. Still, he didn't look at her. Not yet. She knelt in front of him, slowly, carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. Her hands hovered, unsure where to land, unsure if he would let her. And then he lifted his head. His eyes found hers, and for the first time they weren't cold or cruel or unreadable. They were hollow, and behind the hollow there was something else, something old, something that had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with why he had chosen her in the first place. "I killed someone I didn't have to," he said, voice raw, almost hoarse. "Tonight." She didn't flinch, not because it didn't matter, but because nothing about that world shocked her anymore. What shook her was the way he said it, quiet, broken, not proud, not guilty, just empty. She reached for his hand. He let her. His palm was rough, fingers cold. She held it anyway. "I watched him beg," Roman said, watched the light leave his eyes, "and I didn't feel anything, not anger, not power, just silence." Her heart ached for him in a way she didn't understand. She wasn't supposed to feel sorry for a man like Roman. He was power. He was danger. He was the storm that swallowed her whole. But now, in this quiet moment, he was just a man haunted by the shape of who he'd become. He leaned forward, forehead pressing to hers. His breath was shallow, uneven, as if something inside him was unraveling with every second he spent near her. "You were supposed to be a distraction," he whispered. "Something beautiful I could touch without feeling." She closed her eyes. "But you crawled inside me," he breathed. "And now, everything hurts." She didn't speak. She couldn't. Words would only dull what his voice made sharp. So she held him tighter, let him lean into her like she was shelter instead of temptation. And in that moment, she understood the weight of him. Not just his body, but his past, his rage, his need to control everything before it collapsed. He pulled back just enough to look at her. The shadows turned his face into something unrecognizable, softer and more savage at once. "I want to ruin you," he said, low and trembling. "I want to leave marks on your skin no one else can ever erase. I want to make you need me like air." "You already did," she whispered. His breath caught. She rose slowly, pulling him up with her, guiding him to the bed without force. He followed, not because she led, but because he couldn't bear not to be near her. She undressed him with hands that shook only slightly, not from fear, but from the ache of knowing she was about to give herself to a man who didn't just own her body. He owned her silence, her darkness, her breath. When they lay down, it wasn't lust that moved them. It was something deeper. She kissed his chest, his throat, the scar near his ribs. Every inch of him that had been broken, she wanted to feel beneath her lips. And when he finally entered her, it was different this time. Not slower, not softer, but deeper, as if he needed to bury himself inside her just to find something human again. He whispered things he never meant to say, things she would never repeat, things that carved themselves into her skin like poetry, made of bruises and need. She moaned his name into the hollow of his throat, and he gripped her harder, kissed her harder, held her like he was afraid she'd disappear if he blinked. They moved together like they'd done this 1,000 times in 1,000 lives, always coming back to the same ruin, the same fire, the same ache. And when she came apart beneath him, trembling and raw, he held her face in both hands and whispered, "You're mine." She opened her eyes and whispered back, "Yes." Because it wasn't surrender anymore. It was truth. She didn't notice when the fear stopped. There was no grand moment, no clear line drawn between resistance and surrender, just a quiet, creeping shift inside her, one breath at a time, until the panic became craving, and craving became peace. She didn't wait for his footsteps anymore. She listened for them, like a song that had always been playing beneath her skin. She didn't flinch when he touched her throat, didn't tense when his voice wrapped around her in the dark. She leaned into it, welcomed it, needed it, because somewhere along the way, Roman stopped being the man who broke her, and became the only thing that made her feel whole. He was different now too, still sharp, still cold, still carved from danger and control. But when he looked at her, there was something else, something quieter, something that pulsed beneath the surface, like an unspoken truth he didn't know how to name. He watched her like she was the only thing tethering him to this world. And maybe she was. They didn't speak of love. That word never touched their lips. It wasn't big enough, not for what lived between them. What they shared was carved into flesh, written in silence, tasted in every bruised kiss and broken breath. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't safe. It was sacred, and it belonged to no one else. One evening he returned late, blood on his hands, tension in his jaw, eyes stormed with something she couldn't name. She stood in the doorway, barefoot, wearing the dress he liked, black, silk, open down the back. He didn't speak, didn't explain, just crossed the room in 3 slow steps and crushed her against his chest. His heart was racing, loud, erratic, and his breath came in short, controlled bursts. "I thought I lost you," he said into her hair, voice low, almost broken. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. "I killed 5 men tonight," he said, softer now, like a confession meant only for her skin. "Not because I had to, because I couldn't risk them even thinking your name." She didn't pull away. He cupped her face, searched her eyes with that brutal tenderness that always felt like it might destroy her. "Does that scare you?" "No," she whispered. He exhaled. "It should." She shook her head. "I'm already yours." He stared at her for a long time, something unraveling behind his eyes. Then he kissed her, not with hunger, but with reverence. And for the first time she tasted desperation on his tongue, not for sex, not for power, for her. He undressed her slowly, like every inch of her skin deserved to be seen, touched, memorized. She undressed him too, hands careful, deliberate, like peeling away armor he never let anyone else touch. And when they came together that night, it wasn't rough, it wasn't wild, it was worship in motion, skin to skin, breath to breath, a rhythm so intimate it made her eyes burn. He held her as if she were fragile and indestructible all at once. After, they lay in silence, bodies tangled, sweat cooling between them. He traced circles on her thigh, his voice low and steady in the dark. "If you ever leave me, I'll burn the world down to find you. I know, I won't survive it," he said. She turned to him, fingers brushing the line of his jaw. "Then don't let me go." His eyes softened, just enough for her to see the boy he buried deep beneath the man. "I don't think I can." And she smiled, a slow, aching smile that didn't quite reach her lips. Good, because she didn't want to go, not anymore. The woman she used to be, the one who measured her worth in distance, who wore silence like armor and solitude like proof of strength, was gone. Killed by a kiss, buried by a gaze, rewritten by a man who never asked for her love, only her presence. A man who ruined her to rebuild her in his own image. And she let him, because in the end, it wasn't about surrender. It was about choosing the fire. He saw it before she did. The glance, the hesitation, the way the bartender's eyes lingered a second too long on the curve of her mouth as she leaned in to ask for water. It was nothing, innocent. But in Roman's world, nothing was ever just that. His hand found her waist before her voice could thank the man, fingers digging in just enough to remind her of the line she hadn't even crossed. She stiffened, breath catching, not from fear, but from the silent tension that spilled from him like smoke. He didn't speak, not in front of the others, not yet, but the air between them cracked with something sharp, something that made her heart thrum beneath her skin. The car ride was silent, not cold, burning. His jaw was tight, his hand gripping her thigh hard enough to bruise, his gaze fixed on the road as if every passing light was a countdown to what he wouldn't say until they were alone. She could have spoken, could have diffused it with a soft laugh or a kiss to the side of his neck, but she didn't, because part of her liked it, liked the way he unraveled when it came to her, liked that someone so composed, so terrifyingly in control, could come undone by something as small as another man's glance. Because in that unraveling, he became hers. When they stepped into the penthouse, he didn't wait. He closed the door with a calm so deliberate it felt louder than a slam, then turned to her with eyes that didn't just burn, they seared. She backed up without thinking, the silence between them pulling tighter, darker, until her back met the wall and her breath caught in her throat. He stood in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his fury, but still not touching her. "Did you like that?" he asked, voice quiet, deadly. "No," she said, voice shaking. "Did you need him to look at you like that?" "No." "Then why did you let him?" "I didn't." He pressed his hand to the wall beside her head, caging her in. "You don't let anyone look at you like that, not him, not anyone." "I didn't mean to." "I don't care what you meant." His other hand reached for her throat, fingers wrapping gently, not to choke, but to anchor. His thumb traced her pulse, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped lower. "You belong to me, do you understand that?" She nodded, her breath shallow. "Say it. I belong to you." His mouth met hers in a kiss that was nothing like forgiveness. It was punishment, proof. He pulled her close, one arm around her waist, lifting her just enough that her toes barely touched the floor. Her hands clung to his shoulders, not out of fear, but out of the need to hold on as everything inside her crumbled and rebuilt itself in his image. He carried her to the bedroom, not gently, not violently, just inevitably. Her back hit the mattress, his hands already pulling at the dress she wore, lips trailing fire down her collarbone. He wasn't making love to her. He was reclaiming her, re-establishing territory no one had dared to challenge until tonight. When he entered her, it wasn't with patience. It was with precision, a slow, deliberate rhythm meant to remind her of every time she'd said his name in the dark, every moment her body had opened only for him. He held her hips still, forcing her to take it the way he needed to give it, deep, rough, possessive. She moaned his name, and it wasn't enough. "Louder," he growled. She obeyed. He kissed her then, with a desperation that trembled beneath the dominance. Because this wasn't just about another man's eyes, it was about his fear, fear that someone might see her the way he did, that someone else might make her feel something he couldn't, and she knew, beneath all that fire, all that fury, he just wanted to be enough. She wrapped her legs around him, pulling him deeper, and whispered against his mouth, "You are." He stilled. His eyes met hers, something fractured, flickering behind the rage. "You're mine," he whispered. "I know." He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath shaky, his body trembling. "You're all I have." And she understood then that this wasn't control. It was survival. It was love, twisted and raw and aching, the kind that bleeds instead of blooms. And she gave it to him, every broken piece, every breath, every part of her that still remembered who she was before him, because none of it mattered now, only this, only him, only them. She knew what the black velvet box meant the moment she saw it resting on the edge of the bed, unopened, waiting. It wasn't jewelry, not in the traditional sense. Roman didn't give gifts, he gave symbols, and every symbol came with a weight, a message, a choice. He didn't say a word when she walked in, just sat there, shirt unbuttoned, sleeves rolled, watching her with that silent intensity that always made her feel like he already knew what she would do before she did. The city glowed behind him, but all she could see was the darkness in his eyes, steady, unyielding, claiming her before she even moved. She approached slowly, her bare feet making no sound against the floor. She stood in front of him, heart pounding with something that wasn't fear, but anticipation. Her hands hovered over the box, uncertain, not because she didn't want what was inside, but because she already did. And what terrified her was how much. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingertips grazing her jaw. "Open it," he said, voice low, voice calm, voice final. She did. Inside was a collar, not leather, not metal. Satin, black as night, lined in silk, delicate and devastating in its simplicity. No gems, no clasps, just a single gold ring at the center, small and perfect. Her breath hitched, not from shock, from recognition. This wasn't a game, it wasn't about control, it was about belonging. He rose slowly, took it from the box with reverence, stepped behind her, and draped it around her throat. His fingers moved with practiced care, tying it into place like he was sealing a vow. When he stepped in front of her again, his eyes didn't search for doubt. He knew there wasn't any left. "This means no one else touches you," he said softly. "No one else sees you the way I do. I know. This means your body is mine. It always was. This means your soul is mine." She paused, just long enough for her heart to break open beneath his gaze. Yes, his lips found hers, not with force, but with something more dangerous, certainty. He kissed her like she was already marked, already owned, and she kissed him back like she had been waiting her whole life to stop pretending she wasn't. He led her to the bed, laid her down as if she was something precious and volatile. His hands moved over her body with a reverence that trembled beneath the surface, like he was afraid of worshipping her too much, afraid it might make him human. He kissed her throat, just below the collar, his tongue tracing the edges like he was sealing it in place with heat. He moved lower, slower, until she was nothing but breath and want, until her moans were broken, raw, pleading without shame. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. He already had her, every muscle, every sigh, every shiver that slid down her spine. When he finally entered her, it was with a gentleness that cut deeper than any bruise. His body moved with hers like they were speaking in a language no one else would ever understand. He held her wrists above her head, pinned her down not with strength but with presence. She closed her eyes and he whispered, "No, look at me." She obeyed. Because that's what this was now. No longer dominance, no longer resistance. It was ritual. A ceremony built in shadows and breath, where every thrust was a promise and every kiss was a brand. When she came, it wasn't just physical. It was a surrender of everything still unnamed inside her, everything she hadn't yet given, and everything he took without needing to ask. After he stayed inside her, breathing, still. His forehead rested against hers, the collar between them like a heartbeat. "You'll never belong to anyone else," he said. She whispered, "I don't want to." And in that moment, wrapped in his silence, held in his arms, she knew. She wasn't his prisoner. She was his home. She had stopped trying to separate herself from him. There was no line anymore, no distinction between where she ended and Roman began. His breath lived in her lungs, his silence echoed in her thoughts. His hands were her gravity. Even her reflection didn't belong solely to her now. When she looked in the mirror, she saw the way he saw her. Not soft, not broken, not saved. Just his. And that was enough. He hadn't taken her out in weeks, not because he didn't want to, because he didn't trust the world to deserve her. She asked once, gently, half smiling, if she was a secret or a trophy. He hadn't answered. He only kissed her wrist and said, "You're the only thing I've ever wanted to keep." Now, their world was small, deliberate, quiet, a fortress built on whispers and skin. He gave her everything and nothing, control in the illusion of surrender, love without the word itself, and she gave him her mind, her breath, her body, because there was no version of herself left that hadn't already chosen him. He watched her constantly, not in paranoia, in reverence, like he couldn't believe something like her existed in his hands. But it wasn't fragile, what they had. It was feral, wild beneath the stillness. Every movement between them carried tension. Even in peace, there was violence humming beneath the surface, waiting, wanting. She was folding linen in the bedroom when he came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and pressed his mouth against her neck. There was no reason, no request, just presence, heat, claim. He whispered her name for the first time in days, slow and deliberate, like he needed to remind himself she was real. She turned in his arms, looking up at him, and saw the storm already building behind his eyes. Not anger, possession. That haunting, beautiful fury that always bloomed when something inside him broke open. "Take it off," he said, nodding to the silk robe she wore. She did. He watched, always watched, as if seeing her undress was a sacred act, one only he was permitted to witness. When she stood before him, bare and still, he touched her collar, the satin one he had tied days before, and pulled her closer with 2 fingers beneath the gold ring. "I'm going to ruin you again," he murmured. She smiled. "I'm already ruined." He shook his head slowly. "Not enough." And then he kissed her hard and slow, one hand at her throat, the other gripping her hip. He didn't ask if she wanted it. He never had to. Her body answered before her mouth could open. She leaned into him like gravity had finally found its purpose. He pushed her gently to the bed, crawling over her with a weight that wasn't physical. It was emotional, undeniable, consuming. His mouth moved down her chest, across her ribs, down her stomach, like he needed to taste every part of her, remind her exactly where she belonged. Under him, with him, only his. She gasped when his teeth grazed the inside of her thigh, and he looked up at her with a wicked smile. "Do you know what I'd do to anyone who ever tried to touch you? Yes, I'd make them wish they were never born. I know." He moved slowly, deliberately, dragging the anticipation out like a knife across skin. When he entered her, it wasn't with force. It was with intention, deep, endless, like he needed her to feel him long after he was gone. She clawed at his back, pulled him closer, whispered his name into his ear like a prayer and a curse. He fucked her like worship. He whispered things no one else would ever hear. He told her she was beautiful when she cried for him. He told her she was dangerous when she begged. He told her she was his home. And when she shattered beneath him, trembling and raw, he held her so tightly she thought her bones might break. But she didn't want space. She didn't want breath. She wanted only him. His voice was low and broken when he spoke again. "I'm never letting you go. I know. I don't care if you beg. I don't care if you run. You are mine. I won't run." He kissed her collar. "You couldn't." And she smiled through the tears she didn't remember falling. Because he was right. There was no escape. And for the first time in her life, she didn't want one. It happened too fast to stop and too slow to forget. One moment, she was walking across the hotel lobby with her coat wrapped tight around her, Roman waiting in the car outside, silent and patient like always. The next, a hand gripped her wrist, firm, practiced wrong, and pulled her through a side exit so quickly she didn't have time to scream. Her breath caught before her voice did, and the world narrowed to a cold, dim hallway, and the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Two men. Unfamiliar faces, sharp smiles, the kind of confidence that came from thinking they had the upper hand. "You've been very hard to get close to," one of them said, dragging her down a service stairwell, his hand still wrapped around her like ownership. "But you're exactly where we want you now." She didn't cry, didn't scream. She counted the seconds, counted the distance, counted on Roman, because he would feel it the second she didn't return. He would know, and when he came, because he would come, there would be nothing left of the men who touched her. They shoved her into a black van, hands rough, voices cold, and still she didn't break. She thought only of his eyes, his voice, the way he said her name like it meant something sacred, the way his body wrapped around hers like armor. He would find her, even if he had to burn the city to do it. And then it happened. 37 minutes later, the door burst open with a violence she hadn't imagined possible, the sound of gunfire deafening, fast, precise, screams, shouts, the sharp crack of bone-meeting steel. She curled into the corner, heart racing, barely breathing, and when the silence finally fell, thick, sudden, absolute, he was there. Roman, blood on his hands, fire in his eyes, breathing like a man who had just clawed his way out of hell to find the only thing that mattered. He crossed the room in 2 strides, dropped to his knees in front of her, and didn't speak, didn't ask, just pulled her into his arms and held her like the world might vanish if he let go. Her body trembled, and he felt it. His hands moved over her, shoulders, wrists, hips, checking for injuries with a desperation she had never seen in him. And when he realized she was whole, unbroken, just scared, something inside him snapped. "I should have killed them slower," he whispered, voice shredded. She clung to him, burying her face into his neck, breathing him in, letting the world fade around his scent, his touch, his rage. "I'm sorry," she said, though she didn't know why. No. His hand curled around the back of her neck, firm, shaking. "No, this was my fault. I let you out of my sight. I let you walk 5 steps away." She pulled back, just enough to see his face, the blood on his cheek, the tear at his shirt, the look in his eyes that told her he hadn't come to rescue her. He'd come to destroy for her. "I would have died for you," he said, his voice breaking on the last word. "But I'm here, and they touched you." She cupped his face. "They didn't get the chance." He exhaled, shaking now, the fury draining, leaving only the man underneath. Not the king, not the killer, just Roman, hers. He kissed her then, not rough, not punishing, but slow, painful, like he needed to feel her breath in his mouth just to believe she was still alive. His hands gripped her tighter, pulling her into his lap, wrapping her in a silence that said more than any promise ever could. He carried her out himself, into the night, past bodies, past blood, past the wreckage he left behind. No one dared stop him. No one dared speak. When they reached the car, he didn't let her go. He pulled her into the back seat, held her against his chest, and didn't speak for the entire ride. His heart beat so loudly beneath her ear it drowned out everything else. Back at the penthouse, he undressed her carefully, shaking hands, undoing buttons and folds, like he was afraid of hurting her, afraid of seeing bruises that weren't there. He kissed every inch of her skin, not with hunger, but with apology, with reverence. And when he finally laid her down and entered her, it wasn't about need, it was about proof that she was alive, that she was his, that nothing would ever take her from him again. He whispered her name over and over, between kisses, between thrusts, between breaths, until she shattered beneath him, crying, shaking, whispering that she was safe, that she was his, that she wasn't leaving. And when he came undone, it wasn't with a growl. It was with a groan that sounded like salvation. He collapsed beside her, pulled her into his arms, and didn't let go. "You're mine," he whispered, "and now everyone knows." She woke to silence, thick and strange, the kind that wrapped around the room like fog. The sheets were tangled around her waist, her skin still warm from the night before. her thighs aching in that familiar, exquisite way that meant he had needed to remind her she was alive, and his. The bedroom was dim, lit only by the pale light slipping through the blinds, the air heavy with the scent of him, but he wasn't beside her. His side of the bed was empty, cold now, like he'd been gone for hours, and that wasn't like him. She sat up slowly, pulling the robe from the chair, her body still humming with exhaustion and something deeper, something quieter. She padded barefoot through the hallway, every shadow whispering his name, every step an echo of last night's breathless confessions, not spoken but felt, between gasps and thrusts, and the way his mouth had pressed to her heart like it was the only thing tethering him to this world. She found him in the study, lights off, curtains drawn. He was sitting in the armchair by the window, elbows on his knees, head bowed, fingers tangled in his hair, the kind of posture that didn't belong to Roman. It belonged to someone on the edge, someone unraveling. She didn't speak, she just walked toward him slowly, carefully, the way you approach something wild that's pretending to be tame. He didn't move when she reached him, didn't look up, but when she sank to her knees in front of him, his hands dropped and his eyes met hers. They were empty, not with rage, not with control, but with something that looked like guilt. "I wasn't fast enough," he said, voice barely a breath. "You were," she replied gently, firmly. "I'm here." "But they touched you." His jaw tightened. "They breathed near you. That's all it takes sometimes." She reached for his hands, cold and still. He let her take them, but didn't grip back. "I saw your face when I opened that door," he whispered. "You looked at me like you weren't sure I was real." "I wasn't," she admitted. "I thought I was dreaming, or already gone." His breath hitched, just barely. "I've killed for less," he said. "So much less." "I know. And I'd do it again." "I know." Silence. Then he leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers, his hands cupping her face, trembling now, not from anger, but from restraint. "I don't know how to be anything but this," he said. "I don't know how to love without breaking something. You haven't broken me." "I will." "No." She wrapped her arms around him, pulled him down to the floor with her, until they were kneeling, forehead to forehead, breath to breath. "You don't have to say it. I already know. You love me." His eyes closed, and for the first time he didn't flinch at the word. He let it hang there between them, unsaid but undeniable. And maybe that was the real confession. Not what came from his mouth, but what softened in his grip, what unraveled in his stillness. He pulled her closer, held her so tightly she could barely breathe, and still it wasn't enough. His kiss came without warning, deep, slow, full of everything he didn't know how to speak. She let him take her again, right there on the floor, surrounded by shadows and the faint scent of paper and gunpowder. It wasn't rough, it wasn't soft, it was need. The purest kind, the kind that says, "I'd burn for you," and never look back. After, they lay in silence, tangled in each other, the carpet beneath them a poor substitute for the bed they never quite made it to. "You're never leaving me," he said quietly, not as a threat but as a prayer. "I don't want to." And that was the truth, because whatever they were, whatever this became, obsession, salvation, something too dark to name, it was hers too, and she wouldn't give it back for anything. The rain started just after midnight, soft at first, then heavier, steady, like the sky had been holding its breath for too long. She stood at the window in one of his shirts, skin bare underneath, hair still damp from the shower. The city below shimmered, slick and blurred, but all she could see was her own reflection, and the man behind her watching her like she was the last thing keeping him from vanishing. Roman hadn't touched her since they left the study, not because he didn't want to, because he needed to hold something back. But now, the space between them pulsed with something too loud to ignore. He walked toward her slowly, barefoot, shirtless, eyes heavy with something deeper than desire, regret, reverence, hunger. She didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. When he reached her, his hand slid beneath the hem of the shirt, fingers brushing the curve of her waist like a question he wasn't sure he was allowed to ask. She answered by leaning into him, soft and slow, the way her body always did when his was near. His arms wrapped around her from behind, one hand splaying over her stomach, the other pressing flat between her ribs like he needed to feel her heartbeat to believe she was still his. "You're too quiet," he whispered, his breath warm against her neck. "So are you. I'm trying not to break something." "Maybe it already broke," she said. His lips touched her shoulder, then lower, the tension in his jaw so sharp it trembled. "I don't want to be gentle with you tonight." "I'm not asking you to be." He turned her slowly, carefully, like she might vanish mid-motion. And when her eyes met his, it wasn't fire between them. It was the deep, dangerous stillness of water that had swallowed too much. He cupped her face, thumb grazing the edge of her mouth. "I need to feel you," he said. "You already do. Not like this." She nodded. He kissed her then, long and breathless, like they had nowhere else to be but here, in this moment, in this body, in this silence that stretched between them like a vow. He lifted her, carried her to the bedroom, didn't rush. Every step was deliberate, every touch a tether pulling tighter, anchoring her to something neither of them could name. He laid her on the bed like a prayer, not to worship, but to confess. He pulled the shirt off slowly, eyes never leaving hers, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't look like Roman, the man who owned the city, the empire, the blood. He looked like someone searching for his home, and she was right there. He moved over her, not to conquer but to lose himself. His hands mapped her skin with a softness that hurt, fingertips brushing places he'd memorized but now studied like scripture. She touched him too, his shoulders, his chest, the scar near his hip, marking him in return, not to control, just to remind him that he was real, that they both were. When he entered her, there was no sound, just breath, just stillness, just the slow, aching rhythm of two people no longer pretending to be anything but each other's. He held her face the entire time, watched her fall apart beneath him. And when he came, it wasn't with a growl. It was with a broken whisper of her name, like it was the only word left in the world that mattered. They stayed like that for a long time, skin to skin, heart to heart, the rain whispering against the windows, the silence between them no longer cold but full of everything they didn't have to say anymore. And when he finally spoke again, it was quiet, fragile, honest. "You saved me," and she whispered, "So did you." The morning came quietly, the kind of pale silver light that touched everything without asking permission. She woke before him, still tangled in his arms, his breath warm against her shoulder, his body heavy with sleep, and something softer, something she didn't dare name but felt everywhere. His hand was resting just below her ribs, fingers curled slightly, like even in sleep he needed to hold on. She didn't move, just watched the way the light slid across the room, the way it softened the sharp edges of the world they had built in shadows. She thought of everything he had done, everything he had become, the man the world feared and obeyed, and how that same man now slept like a boy beside her, his face unguarded, his body wrapped around hers like she was the only thing keeping him from shattering. And maybe she was. Maybe that was why he never said it out loud, why he never used words to name what pulsed between them, because to name it would make it fragile, and he didn't know how to be fragile. Not yet. She shifted slightly, just enough to turn toward him. His eyes opened the second her hand brushed his chest, as if her touch was the only alarm he needed. He didn't speak, just looked at her, and in that look she saw all of it: possession, hunger, fear, love. The kind of love that doesn't sound like poetry, but feels like a fist tightening around your soul. He brushed her hair from her face, his thumb grazing her cheekbone, and she leaned into it without thinking. "You were watching me," he said, voice rough with sleep. "I always watch you." His lips curved, not into a smile, but into something quieter, more dangerous. "That should scare me," he said. "It doesn't." "No," he murmured. "It doesn't." She traced the scar along his collarbone, slow and careful, her fingers whispering against his skin. "Do you ever think about what it would have been like if we met somewhere else?" "No." "Why?" "Because I would have ruined you anyway." She met his eyes, unflinching. You didn't ruin me. He exhaled, hands sliding down her back, pulling her closer. You let me. I wanted to. He kissed her then, not with urgency, but with gratitude, as if her presence was the one thing he didn't know how to deserve. And when he pulled back, there was something different in his eyes. Not softness, not vulnerability, just clarity. Like he finally understood that she wasn't going anywhere. Not because she was weak, but because she chose him. Every piece, every shadow, every scar. I want to keep you here, he said. Forever. You already do. No, I mean it, he said. I want to put a lock on the door. Burn the world outside. Make it so no one else ever remembers your name. She didn't laugh. She didn't flinch. She just touched his face and whispered, then do it. And he kissed her like he would. Slow, final, unforgivable. And she let him. The room was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after fire, when everything has already burned, and all that remains is heat and breath, and the memory of being consumed. She stood by the window, the city a blur of lights beneath her, one of his shirts clinging to her thighs, his scent still warm in the fabric. Behind her she heard him move, no footsteps, just presence, just the shift in air when something powerful draws near. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. She felt him before he touched her. When his hands slid around her waist, slow and deliberate, she leaned back into him without hesitation. His mouth brushed the curve of her neck, and she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for a lifetime. His touch wasn't soft, it was reverent, the kind of reverence that doesn't worship from a distance, but kneels and devours and lives inside the ruin. His fingers moved up, over her ribs beneath the shirt. When he lifted it, she raised her arms, silent, bare, open. He dropped it to the floor without looking away from her. Turn around, he whispered. She did. And when their eyes met, it wasn't desire between them anymore, it was promise. She touched his chest first, slow, palm flat against his heart. It was beating fast, steady, like it only knew how to live in her presence. He kissed her then, mouth to mouth, hand at the back of her neck, pulling her deeper, closer, until the space between them disappeared completely. He lifted her, carried her to the bed without breaking the kiss, laid her down, like she was something he had spent his whole life searching for, and had finally earned. He looked at her in the dark, let his eyes memorize her, every line, every breath, every part of her that belonged to no one else. And then he touched her, not with haste, not with hunger, but with knowing, like his hands had been built for this exact moment, for this exact woman, and had waited long enough. When he slid into her, it wasn't slow, it was right. Her body welcomed him like it had been made for this, for him, for the ache and the stretch and the certainty of being filled in all the ways that mattered. Her hands gripped his back, nails digging in not to hurt, but to stay grounded in the storm of him. He moved with her, through her, against her, their bodies a rhythm carved from heat and breath, and the kind of love that never needed to be said aloud to be real. He whispered her name against her skin like a vow. She whispered his like a surrender, and together they moved towards something holy, something final. He didn't rush. He didn't speak. He just gave her everything. And when she broke beneath him, crying out, trembling, undone, he followed her over the edge, not with force, but with the softest groan of her name, like it was the only thing that had ever mattered. They stayed like that afterward, tangled and silent, the room still humming with the echo of them. He touched her face, brushed the hair from her eyes, kissed her once, slow and deep, and then he said it. I love you, not as a weapon, not as a weakness, but as the truth. And she didn't cry. She just pulled him closer and said it back. The mornings were slower now, quieter, wrapped in a kind of stillness that didn't come from peace, but from the weight of having survived. She woke before the sun most days, not because she had to, but because her body remembered a time when every breath had to be earned. The bed beside her was warm, sheets rumpled, the scent of Romans still clinging to the air. He was always up before her, even now, even after everything. Habit, discipline, control. But he never left without pressing a kiss to the inside of her wrist, without touching her like she was still the most dangerous thing he'd ever loved. She sat up slowly, the silk of her nightgown falling to her thighs, her hand instinctively resting over the soft swell of her belly. The house was never silent anymore. 3 children made sure of that. Their voices echoed down hallways. Roman once walked in silence. Laughter spilled into rooms that used to hold only tension and shadows. And still, nothing felt less dangerous. The darkness hadn't left. It had simply folded itself into their lives like a quiet god watching from the corners. She padded barefoot across the marble floors, passing through a living room filled with tiny toys and expensive furniture. The blend of chaos and control, the evidence of a life not planned, but chosen. In the kitchen, Roman was standing at the counter, coffee in hand, his shirt unbuttoned, the morning paper untouched beside him. One of the twins, Nico, was perched on the stool beside him, legs swinging, messy hair and sleepy eyes, chewing on a piece of toast like it was a negotiation. Roman looked up the second she entered. He always did. His gaze softened in that way it only ever did for her, eyes still dark, still dangerous, but settled now, like whatever storm once raged inside him had been claimed by something stronger. Her. He walked toward her without speaking, slid a hand to the back of her neck, pulled her close, and kissed her like the years hadn't passed, like they were still in that hotel room, still breathing each other in for the first time. And then he rested his forehead against hers, whispered good morning against her skin, and stepped back only when Nico groaned and told them to stop being gross. She laughed, a soft, real sound, one that used to feel like a betrayal, and now felt like a right. She moved to the stove, poured coffee, listened as the other 2 children thudded down the stairs, Lucia and Matteo, fighting over something unimportant and furious in the way only siblings could be. Roman didn't intervene. He never did, unless it mattered. He let the noise live, let the house be full. Later, when the children had disappeared into the backyard, under the watchful eye of men who had once been soldiers but were now protectors, Roman pulled her back into the bedroom, not with urgency, with need, the same quiet, constant need that had lived between them from the beginning. He closed the door behind them, reached for her, and she let herself be taken. Again, always. His hands moved over her slowly, reverently, rediscovering the shape of a body he already knew better than his own. He laid her down with the same care he always did, like she was something precious, something claimed. And when he entered her, it was not about passion anymore. It was about memory, about belonging, about how nothing else had ever been real before this. Afterward, he lay beside her, one hand on her stomach, his thumb moving in slow, steady circles over the small bump just beginning to show. He didn't speak for a long time. He didn't have to. The silence between them had always meant more than words. Finally, he said, "I didn't think I'd get to have this." She turned to him, eyes open, voice soft. "What did you think you'd have?" "Power," he said. "Control. Loneliness. I thought that was what I was made for. And now," he looked at her, and there it was again. That look, the one that said she was everything, the one that said he would tear down the world again if it ever tried to take her from him. "Now I understand," he said, brushing a kiss to her forehead. "I was never built for peace. I was built to protect it." And she let herself believe it, let herself feel it, because this was who they were now. Not perfect, not saved, but together, bound by fire, held by choice, surviving still, but living now too, and that was enough. She stood at the edge of the balcony long after the sun had disappeared, the night curled around her like a velvet cloak, soft and endless. The house behind her glowed in warm tones, dimmed lights, muffled laughter, the scent of Roman's cologne still lingering in the air. Somewhere down the hall her children slept, their small breaths filling rooms that once held silence like a weapon. She could hear the steady echo of security outside the gates, the quiet murmur of the world she now ruled from within. But out here, with the breeze on her skin and the city stretching beneath her feet, there was only stillness, only breath, only memory. She touched the collar around her neck, the one he still made her wear at night, not because he needed to remind her, but because she needed to feel it. It wasn't restraint anymore. It was a reminder of everything, of where she came from, of who she had become, of what it meant to be chosen, not saved. The satin felt like skin now, like a part of her, soft and worn and permanent. Behind her she felt him move. He never made a sound, but she always felt him. The change in the air, the hum beneath her skin, the weight of him before he ever laid a hand on her. He stepped behind her, warm and quiet, his chest pressing gently to her back, his arms slipping around her waist like he'd never stopped doing it. His chin rested on her shoulder, breath brushing her ear, steady and slow. "You're thinking too loud," he whispered. "I'm remembering." He didn't ask what. He never did. His hands moved over her stomach, up her sides, across her ribs, not to arouse, not to own, just to feel, to mark the shape of the woman who had once walked into his life for one night and never left. Not because he asked, because she chose to stay. Again and again. The city lights flickered below, but she wasn't looking at them anymore. Her eyes were closed, and all she felt was him, his scent, his warmth, the way his presence filled her lungs like truth. He kissed her neck once, lightly, slowly. "I almost lost you," he said. "You didn't. I could have, but you didn't." His grip tightened, just a little, just enough. "I didn't know how to love you," he said. "Not at first. I didn't know how to be loved," she whispered. "You scared me. You broke me." They stood there, still, the wind pulling at her hair, the moon casting soft shadows across their skin. His hands slid lower, settled on her hips, grounding her, claiming her, holding her exactly where she had always belonged. "I never thought peace would look like this," he said. "This isn't peace." He smiled against her skin. "No, it's better." And it was, because it was real, raw, imperfect. It bled and healed and bled again, but it never disappeared, never faded, never asked to be anything but what it was. She turned in his arms, pressed her palms to his chest, looked up into the face that still made her breath catch. Years later, after the blood, after the scars, after the children who carried his eyes and her silence, he looked at her like he always had, like she was the only thing he'd ever trusted, the only thing he'd ever feared, the only thing that could bring him to his knees and hold him there without a word. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. "You were never afraid of me." "No," she breathed, "just of needing you." "And now," she leaned in, her lips brushing his, "now I'm yours." He kissed her like a promise. And when they finally pulled apart, when she turned back to the city and he stood behind her again, arms around her, silence between them, she knew. It wasn't about the life they built. It was about surviving the fire and choosing to stay in the ashes together. Thank you, truly, for listening all the way through. It means more than I could ever say. Every story I share is a piece of my heart, and knowing you were here, feeling it, living it with me, makes it all worth it. Your presence, your time, your emotion. I don't take any of it for granted. And if you ever feel like leaving a comment or tapping that little heart, it may seem small, but to me, it's everything. Each like, each word, each share, helps this space grow, helps these stories find others who need them, helps love spread a little further in this world. So if you haven't yet, I'd love for you to subscribe now, so you never miss a moment, a confession, or a love that stays long after the last word. I'm so grateful to have you here, and I can't wait to whisper the next story to you.